I'm Matt Ellman, and you're listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast. We've got lots of useful tips and tricks to help you plan your school year as you prepare your learners for their Cambridge English qualifications. Whether you've been teaching exam classes for years or just at the start of your teaching career, come along with us. We'll help you unpack the English language exam journey using our own real-life experience and easy-to-follow examples from the exam preparation course Complete. So, let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by me, Matt Ellman. I'm the Professional Learning and Development Manager at Cambridge, designing and delivering training for teachers, institutions and ministries of education around the world. I've worked as a teacher and trainer in the UK, Spain and Malaysia, and I've delivered courses, workshops and talks in around 30 countries. Hello everyone and welcome back to our series on the B2 First exam. In today's episode we're talking about context, and we're going to talk about what it is and why it matters, how to exploit it, and some strategies that your learners can use as they prepare for their B2 First exam, but also in the B2 First exam itself. So let's get started. So what exactly is context and why does it matter? Well, there are three elements that make up context, and they are the topic, the people, and the mode. Let's talk about each of these in turn. First of all, the topic. What is being written about or what is being spoken about? That's simple enough. The second element, the people. This means that we think about the relationship between the people communicating and the aims of those people, and whether there is, for example, a kind of hierarchy in their relationship. So somebody talking to their boss, there's obviously a hierarchy there, whereas if you speak to your friend, you're kind of on the same level, so to speak. The third element of context is the mode, and there we're thinking about whether our language is spoken or written, but there can be some overlap between these. So for example, if you use an instant messaging chat, then you are writing, you're using written English, but it will have many of the features of spoken English. And if you listen, for example, to a political speech, then it's spoken, but it will have many features of written language because it's probably been entirely written down. The key here is to understand that context, these three things, topic, people, and mode, always have an effect on the language that we use. So the vocabulary and the grammar structures that we use are tied to the context in which we are communicating. To give you an example of this, a professor talking about the structure of the brain to a group of university students will use different language to a book for primary school children about the brain. So even though they have similar aims, the context is different enough that the language also needs to change because the people are different and the mode is different, even though the topic is a similar topic. When it comes to learners, our learners need to be able to make connections and notice relationships between language and context in order to progress as learners and to work their way up the CEFR scale. And in the exam, in the B2 First exam, understanding context will help learners understand whatever it is they are about to read or listen to, and it will help them also understand how to speak and write in the exam in a way that gets the best marks. So now that we understand what context is and why it matters, let's think about how we can exploit it. I'm taking a look at the B2 First Students book for Complete, and on page 99 there's a listening task. This is related to part 1 of the listening exam. If you look on the right hand side of the page, we've got a range of different questions, and for each question we get a different context. So for example, you hear a man talking to his friend about a relaxation class he attended. Or you hear a sports coach talking about problems faced by professional athletes. And you'll notice that here in the question, every question gives you the topic, the people, and the mode. Obviously the mode is spoken because it's a listening paper. But we get the topic and the people, and the relationship between them is something that we need to notice. So encouraging your learners to really pay attention to this is very, very important. Just to give you another example, you overhear a man and a woman talking about a television series, or you hear a woman talking about a past fear of heights. We need to be able to read this and then think about what it is we might hear so that we're ready for it and we're prepared for it. That's the listening paper, but if we go a few pages further on, page 104, then we can look at a writing task, and this relates to part 2 of the writing exam. In this case, we're looking at a report, and you can see the green box on page 104 gives you the task. It says, the college where you study has been given a large amount of money to spend either on improving the classrooms or on students' social activities. The director of your college has asked you to write a report. In your report, you should explain the benefits of both ideas and say which idea you think should be chosen and why. Here again, we know from the question what the topic is, who the people involved are, and whether it's written or spoken. Obviously, it's the writing paper, so it's written. But we need again to be able to infer from the information that we're given what the key elements of context are. And since it's the director of your college, the relationship here is a formal relationship, and we need to write our report in a formal manner. On the facing page, page 105, there's another green box with a very similar task, but in this case, you're writing the report for your English teacher. Now, you have probably a better relationship with your English teacher. You know them slightly better. So this report could potentially afford to be slightly less formal. This is a good example, I think, of how the context influences what the students should be writing in the exam. When it comes to classroom activities for developing your students' ability to work with context, a very simple thing that you can do is to take an existing text and then tweak the context and invite the students to tweak the text accordingly. As an example, I'm looking at page 105 of the complete B2 First students book, and on this page we have a sample answer to the writing task that I just mentioned, where the director of the college wants a report on how to spend money. What we can do is take this text and then change the context and see if our learners can work with the text accordingly so that it meets the new context. So for example, instead of writing the report for the director of the college, we might write the report for our own teacher. Now we've got a better relationship, a closer relationship with our own teacher, and that means that the report doesn't need to be as formal as it would be if it were for the director. Or we can change it completely from a written text into a spoken text. And instead of writing a report to give our thoughts, we can instead maybe have an interview with our teacher to give our thoughts. Again, we're going to be talking about the same topic, but the people are different. So the relationship between those people is different and the mode is different. So the context has changed and our learners need to adapt to that and use different language in order to achieve the same communicative aims. So this is something that we can do quite quickly and easily. It can be done for homework or it can be done as a role play, for example. So there are lots of options, lots of quite easy and quick options that we have when it comes to working with context. The final element we want to consider when we're considering context are the strategies that our learners can take away. And we've got strategies here that learners can apply outside the classroom to progress their learning, as well as strategies that they can use in their B2 First exam. So when it comes to strategies for use outside the classroom, one of the best things that learners can do is to simply notice elements of context in the language that they are exposed to outside the classroom. And in fact, this doesn't even need to be English language. It can be the language that they come across in their their home language, their first language, because context is a universal thing. But ask them to notice what's the topic that's going on and who are the people involved. What's the relationship between those people and what are their aims? And how does that relate to the language that they're using? Do they notice similar language in other contexts or not? How specific is the language to this particular context? For this to work, your students need to be exposed to a relatively wide range of contexts in the first place. So the reading that they need to do in English should be reading of a reasonably wide range of texts, as well as the listening that they do should be listening to a reasonably wide range of texts. So encourage them to listen to, not just their favourite Netflix shows, but maybe the radio a little bit as well, the news, things like that. When it comes to strategies for the exam, it's really important that learners pay attention to the information that is given. So, for example, in our listening task that we had before, we were given this information. You will hear a man talking about the happiest countries in the world, or you hear a woman talking about a study she carried out into leisure activities. This information is always given in the listening paper, and similarly in, for example, the reading paper, there are pictures, there are headlines, there are clues to the text that the learners are going to be exposed to. So it's really important that the learners pick up on those clues and think about them when they interpret the text. Let's recap. So in this episode, we've been considering context and the value it can have for your learners on their exam journey. We've talked about what context is and why it matters, both for language learning and in the B2 First exam. We've talked about how to exploit context, and we've seen some examples in Complete, as well as some classroom activities that you can use to enhance your learners' noticing of the elements of context. And finally, we've considered strategies that your learners can use to develop their awareness of context outside the classroom and also in the B2 First exam itself. So I hope this was useful and hope you'll join us for the next episode. That's it for today. Discover more episodes from this series on our website, cambridge.org/completeconfidence. We have podcast episodes for every level of the Cambridge exams. Come back and join us again soon. And don't worry, you've got this.
You've been listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast, brought to you by Cambridge University Press and Assessment.